Bouncing. Cool. So recently, a young couple with a couple little kids moved into my neighborhood, just a few houses around the cul-de-sac from me, into a rental house. And I went over, and they were outside, and went over and talked with them. And I said, "Hi, my name is Kent." And the guy says, "Yes, sir, my name is Sean." And I recognize a real thick Southern accent. Now, I live in North Carolina, which has its share of Southern accents, but this was thicker and syrupy. And I says, "Oh, so where are you from?" And he goes, "Georgia." And I go, "Well, actually, I'm from 29 Palms in San Diego. That's where I've been the last 3 years." He was a Marine, or he is a Marine, and he just got transferred out and that kind of stuff. So, but where's home? Oh, Georgia's home. And the same could be true of each of us. Where home is important. And so we're going to look at this first chapter where Daniel and his 3 friends and a bunch of other guys were ripped away from their homes, and transported across the Fertile Crescent to Babylon, and would never see their home again. And this is the first test in this whole thing about, we're going to discover what kind of character Daniel and his 3 friends had. All right? So how do you cope when in the middle of, when it feels like you're just not home, where things aren't going right, where difficulties arise, where misunderstandings, where friendships are broken, where family relationships just aren't right? How do you cope? That's what this first chapter is all about. So let's get into it. I'm calling this, "You Can't Go Wrong by Doing Right." The first few verses talk about how God gave the Israelis into Nebuchadnezzar's hand. In fact, look in your Bibles, and if you underline or circle or mark your Bibles, underline the phrase "God gave" or "the Lord gave." It occurs several times. So retribution in verses 1 through 7. In the 3rd year, verse 2, "And the Lord gave Jehoiakim." It wasn't that Nebuchadnezzar overpowered. Notice the perspective. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, and some of the vessels of God. Down in verse 9, "And God gave Daniel favor." And then in verse 17, "As for these 4 youths, God gave." Those are important words. God gave the nation of Judah into Babylon's hands. It was retribution, because he had promised he would if the nation did not remain faithful in Leviticus 26. He said he would, and God is following through on his promise. And he gave the nation into the Babylonians' hands. So, first he gave the king. Jehoiakim had already proven unworthy to be king. He had made alliances with other nations where God had said, "Don't do that. Don't trust in the strength of other nations to secure your own safety. Trust in me." No, he started making alliances, and in fact, when Babylon first came through, he says, "Hey, I'll pay you guys money not to invade us." And so he was paying like a tribute to Babylon this whole time. He was in cahoots with Egypt, which Babylon hated, and he just was an unworthy king. He did not follow God in very many ways. And he became a vassal, which was a kind of like a puppet ruler. But then God gave that nation over, and along with some of the vessels are some of the cups and bowls and things that were very precious and very holy. Do you know what the word holy means?
Set apart.
Set apart, very separate, unique for a special purpose. And God gave those things to Nebuchadnezzar, and he took them off and put him in his storehouse. some of those, and God gave the cream of the crop of that generation, of that young generation. These guys were deported. Oh, I'm off. Where am I? I don't have my whole first point in my PowerPoint. Sorry. So he deported these guys, young men, Ivy Leaguers. They were all from wealthy families, well-educated, healthy, talented guys. Those are the guys that were chosen to go to Babylon. And I can imagine there was some jockeying and positioning and wanting to get in good and so that you didn't have a horrible life when you got there. There's a lot of people who probably just went along with the program. Once they got to Babylon, they were put into a school like this one for 3 years. And even their menu was regulated by the king himself, who fancied himself somewhat of an Epicurean. You know what an Epicurean is? Somebody who really knows a lot about food and drink and how pairings go and all that kind of stuff. And, if you're going to have lamb, then you ought to have this special wine to go with it. Those are Epicureans, okay? To me, I'm like, I see food, I eat it. I don't care how it goes. As long as it goes in here, I'm good. All right? Not an Epicurean. But King Nebuchadnezzar thought he was, and so he established the menu for these guys. And so these guys were deported to Babylon to be reprogrammed, to have their Israeli citizenship and culture and identity stripped and replaced with Babylonian culture and identity and beliefs. So they were given new identification, new names, Babylonian names that were very descriptive. Back then, a person's name was actually more than something their parents made up and went, I think I'll call you Star. They were meaningful. Daniel, which means God is my judge, and that'll become important the more we get into these stories, became Belteshazzar, not Belshazzar, Belteshazzar, which means Belti, one of their gods, protect the king. Belshazzar, as far as I can tell, which means Bel was another god. He was a much more powerful god. And Bel helps this king, is what that name means. So Daniel became Belteshazzar. Hananiah, which means Yahweh is gracious, became Shadrach, which is inspired of Aku, the Babylonian god of the moon. Mishael, which means who is what God is, became Meshach, or belonging to Marduk. Marduk was actually the god of war. When I was in 8th grade, my history teacher had a big, long paddle that hung on the wall, had holes drilled in it, and the name Marduk inscribed, engraved in this paddle. And that's what he would use if we got out of line. I got to get close and personal with Marduk twice. And finally, Azariah, which means Yahweh has helped, became Abednego, which means servant to Nebo, another one of the gods. So they were given new ID. They were stripped of their Israeli clothing, probably given Babylonian clothing. They were to learn the language of the Babylonians, which was what?
Babylonian?
Aramaic, yes. Because they knew Hebrew. They didn't quite know Aramaic very well. They might have known it if their families were involved in commerce and trade, on the trade routes that went through the Fertile Crescent. They were to learn the language, learn the literature. Babylonian literature was extensive. They had huge libraries of cuneiform tablets. You know what cuneiform is? They had tablets about the size of your phone, but much thicker, of clay, and they would press these indentations into the cuneiform tablets in different designs that each stood for a word or a letter, And they had extensive libraries about history about interpreting dreams, about warfare information, how to organize, about philosophy, that kind of thing. They were supposed to learn all of that kind of stuff in Babylon. And they were supposed to adopt the culture of Babylon. They had to learn the norms. They had to learn to move among society as esteemed and high-ranking people. Yeah.
So, I know God gave Daniel the ability to interpret dreams.
Yep.
Do you think God used the fact that they were teaching how to interpret dreams to help him interpret the dreams?
That could have been, but we'll find out later that those books about how to interpret dreams didn't help a lot.
Oh.
Yeah. So these guys, through no fault of their own, they did not deserve this, were pulled from their homes and their families and deported to Babylon and immersed in this new culture. And they were supposed to lose their original identity and become Babylonians. And like I said earlier, how well they did in school determined what kind of jobs they got after graduation. And graduation meant they had to present themselves to the king and answer some questions, which would be a fairly intimidating experience. But Daniel decided to resist. Verses 8 through 14. One of my favorite verses in the Bible. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself. Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself. Daniel decided, and his three friends along with him, we understand later, to maintain a dual identity. He had to learn the Babylonian literature. He had to adopt the Babylonian culture. He had to embrace a new identification, but he did not have to lose his faith in God or his love for his homeland in the process. They decided to maintain dual identities. And that's an important part. We live in a world that demands that we learn its culture, adopt its culture, approve of its culture. And there's a difference between learning and adopting and approving. We also must maintain our dual identities. We'll look at that in a minute. Daniel resolved. How would you describe that word when you read it? When you read the resolved, what does that bring to your mind? Decided. I think it might be a little stronger than that. What would be stronger than decided?
Mine says
Determined,
determined.
yeah.
Promise to yourself?
Promise to yourself, yeah. Those all fit that whole definition of he made a hard and fast rule for himself, is the way I read it. A hard and fast rule for himself. I am not going to defile myself. Now there's some reasons that he might not, why eating the king's food and drinking his wine might have been a problem for him. Do you have any ideas what those might have been?
Pork.
Yes, there might have been pork involved. Oh, I already said the dual identity thing. And continued dependence on God. We'll just blow past that. So he resolved himself to not to defile, which to an Israeli, eating the food might have been not kosher. It might have included salt. It may have been, let's see. Okay, then not an easy decision. Let's see if I have that. All right, I don't. So there's three things that they could have been. First off, it may not have been kosher. It may include pig meat, bacon. I don't know how Israelis did it without bacon, the most wonderful thing on earth. But it wasn't kosher. It could be that it was offered to Babylonian gods before it was served, kind of like how we pray for a meal before it happens. And but I really think that it could have been both of those. And the third reason is they wanted to show their dependence upon God. If they partook of the Babylonian and the whole program, and they achieved success, to what would they then attribute their success? Their performance within the Babylonian system. But if they maintained their faithfulness to God in the process and still became successful, they could have maintained that God gave them success, not the Babylonians. In fact, let me read a quote from a book that I found during my study of this. They were in the process of education and preparation for service. Their minds, as well as their bodies, were being fed by the Babylonian court. If they prosper, then to whom should they attribute their development and success? The Babylonians. However, by refusing to eat the food of the king, they know it is not the king who is responsible. So this was a big, huge, hairy deal for Daniel and his 3 friends. How are they going to maintain faithfulness to God within this foreign culture and expectations? So it was not an easy decision. So Daniel came up with a solution. His first try was to ask the school principal, hey, can we not eat the king's food, drink the king's wine? And what was the principal's response? Do you remember what he said?
You want me to die?
You want me to die? I'm afraid of the king, and he will cut my head off. And that's not figurative language, that's literal language if he sees you looking worse than any of the other guys. So, if I was Daniel and his 3 friends, I'd think, well, okay, I've tried. I did what I could. I guess I'm going to have to. I have no other choice. I have got to go along with the program. How easy I give up in my determination, my rule for myself to maintain my faith and my purity toward God. How easily I'm just, oh well, I guess I have to. There's no other choice. I have to. But Daniel came up with a second try. He goes to their teacher with a plan. And what was the plan? Yeah, be vegans for 10 days. 10 days. Anybody ever try a 10-day diet? I remember one time there was like this Beverly Hills diet, and you had to eat like pineapple every meal for like 10 days.
That sounds like a lot of canker sores.
Yeah, it was not happy. After like a day, that afternoon, I was like, forget it. Give me an In-N-Out burger. I'm in. So and I've gone on like the Daniel 10-day the Daniel plan diet, where there's a 10-day fast where you do this thing. Nothing happens. I still weigh the same after the 10 days as I did before. There's just like, and if I lost anything, as soon as I eat a normal meal, it comes right back on. 10 days, that's pretty unreasonable for Daniel to say, give us vegetables and we'll drink water, and have us compared with the rest of the guys after 10 days. If we don't look better, all right, we're in. He was stepping out, I'll tell you what. I don't think an angel appeared to Daniel. It would have been reported to say, hey, do this and you're going to be good. He was stepping out on faith that it would work. And in that culture, the fatter you were, the more healthy you were. Because it was no problem to be skinny. And everybody was skinny. There was, if you had enough food to put some fat on, you were doing really well,
Like showing you're rich.
Yes, right. So this decision must not have been an easy one. But the teacher said, hey, what have I got to lose? Nothing happens in 10 days. So he gave them vegetables, and they drank water. And guess what? It worked. At the end of the 10 days, they were fatter. Holy mackerel, on vegetables and water. How did that happen? Yeah, they were really fatty vegetables. No, it was God. It was a miracle, yeah.
Did they get fatter or did they get more muscular?
Fatter. Yeah, back then, the muscular guys were soldiers, but the politicians were all porky. The porkier, the better.
Mine says their features are better and fatter in flesh.
There you go. So, and that's, by the way, that's a little clue that this is authentic ancient literature. We would never, if somebody writing this after the Roman Empire, would have written this, they wouldn't have said fatter. It's just one of those things that kind of comes up that goes, oh yeah, this is authentic. So it worked. They were fatter. And, I have to back up. Why would this decision be a difficult one for Daniel and his friends? Well, number one, the king himself, Epicurean, had designed the menu, so they would be defying him, and he was a very powerful and very scary guy. Secondly, to refuse the food was a sure way to spoil their chances of advancement and showing them and possibly getting a good job. They were condemning themselves to being carpenters all their life. Being garbage collectors all their life. Somehow my brain clicked to Mary's husband, Joseph, who by taking Mary as his wife, gave up any chance of success. He couldn't build his own business. He could not build houses. He couldn't achieve any sort of success. He was going to be relegated to being a handyman, a fix-it man, that kind of thing. So anyway, this same kind of decision Daniel and his friends were making. They were giving up any chance of success. And the quality of the food was exceptional. It came from the king's own kitchen, for crying out loud. It wasn't what was given to all the other people that worked in the government at that time. It came from the king's own table. All the other friends that came from Israel were enjoying these meals. Everybody else was compromising and going along with the program, and they would stick out like a sore thumb. Their peer pressure must have been incredible. And the natural thinking would have been, if God didn't protect them, here they are in a foreign land, what do they owe God? God did not come through for them, so why should I follow him? These guys seem to be more powerful than God. And in that era, if a nation was conquered by another nation, the conquering nations had subdued those gods of that other nation. So in these people's thinking, Israel's God was no big deal. It was easy pickings. Babylon's gods, now they were the big deal. So those pressures made this decision very difficult for Daniel and his friends. So it worked. The 10-day diet worked. And it wasn't just for 10 days. For the next 3 years, these guys were vegans. Can you imagine? I was thinking about making today vegan day for you guys. Decided that would be a little bit much. But I was going to talk to, who's the food person?
Emily. I think she'd be too happy about that.
And say, can we just do vegetables and water today, just for today? I thought, nah, that's a little over the top. But they had to have vegetables and water for the next 3 years, all during their school. It's quite the sacrifice.
We have a vegan in our class.
Is there a vegan here? Yes, okay. Yeah, that's fine, but my father plays dominoes better than your father. But these guys chose to be vegans for 3 years, while the rest of their friends ate the king's menu and enjoyed every bite, kind of thing. So the idea is that the vegetables, the word for it comes from seed but doesn't have seed in it. So like fruits were out, that kind of thing. So at the end of the 10 days, it worked. It wasn't just a one-off for the next 3 years. The teacher probably informed the principal, hey, these guys are on a special diet. Okay, so just give them a special thing. The principal says, hey, it's working for them. It's working for me. And for the next 3 years, they went after it. And notice that, once again, God gave. What did he give Daniel and his friends? Look it up, verse. What's that? Wisdom, knowledge,
Understanding.
and understanding, and skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel even had the ability to understand dreams and visions, which to me, that's pretty amazing. So, in response to their faithfulness, God gave them what they couldn't have given themselves. He made them smarter. You want to be smarter? Be like the vegan. No, it's not the vegetables that made them smarter. What made them smarter? That's who made them smarter, but why? Their faithfulness, yes. Their determination not to defile themselves. And their creativity to come up with solutions to allow them to remain faithful to God.
Did the pagan gods not eat vegetables?
They ate vegetables, but they also ate meat and...
Because they were trying not to eat food that was offered to the pagan gods.
Right.
But if vegetables were offered to them, then
So that's a clue that the menu may have been non-kosher as far as how the meat was stored, prepared, all that, including pork. You know, they may have just got the salad part of the meal. So, final exams come 3 years later. And these guys have to stand in front of the king. Can you imagine the pressure? So the king, these guys, and there's like 150 of them, so this must have taken place over the course of a couple weeks. And the king grills them on information that they've learned, skills that they've acquired. And among all 150 or so, none are found as bright or clever or insightful or skilled as those 4 guys. Now they're your age, and they are ready to take their positions in the government. So the king spoke with them and got to know who they were. He may have heard of them before they arrived. He may have heard that these 4 were a little off, a little different. And then, so he finally goes, oh, you guys are the guys that are eating the vegetables, right? Yeah, we're the ones. Oh, cool. Tell me how that went. Well, it wasn't easy. Right? And then he asked them about the literature, about the history, about all that kind of thing. And they stood out 10 times better than everybody else. I don't know what kind of qualitative evaluation they used back then, but 10 times better is pretty much impressively better. And they were given jobs right in the palace. They weren't sent off to a outlying province to organize things there. They didn't become the civil engineers or maintain supervision of work crews or whatever it was. They worked right in the palace, right in the capital building. And the last verse in this chapter says, Daniel continued. This book covers Daniel's lifespan all the way up through when the Medes, Persians took over Babylon and established their rule there, which is a pretty cool thing. In fact, if I can look at my notes here, yet another aspect of God's blessing on Daniel in this sentence, Daniel lived and continued as a valuable member of the court until old age. God blessed him with wisdom, skill, learning, and tact, and long life. Through all the plots and intrigues of the palace and governmental maneuverings and political shenanigans, Daniel prospered and continued, which is quite a gift from God. Now the so what part. Before I write any talk for teenagers and stuff, I write these 2 words at the top of each page, of the first page. So what? If we can answer the so what question, then we're doing okay, right? So what? Preserve your dual identity. You and I live in a pagan world, and it's getting more pagan all the time. I've been around long enough and have been around some older guys. I was chaplain for guys who were fighter pilots against Germany in World War II. And the way they described our world in their situations is way different as far as faith is concerned than ours. We've made progress in many ways, in social justice ways and such, but boy, we are more and more pagan every day. And you're becoming part of a fewer and fewer group of people who have faith in God. And so we need to maintain dual identities. We need to be a part of this world, but what? Not in it. I mean, in it, but not of it. Does that make sense? You've heard that, be in the world, but not of the world. Yeah, we're dressing normal clothes. We're not, being like some religions that you have to wear certain clothes to be holy. You know what I mean? We are in the culture, but not of the culture. We need to maintain our dual identities.
Something in me wants to fight that phrase.
Dual identity?
Yes.
And do you know why?
Because we're not supposed to have any identity in this world, I don't think. Yes, we should know what's going on, and we're living in it, obviously, but it shouldn't be how we identify ourselves.
No, we don't identify. We have an identity in the world, but it's an identity that's not of the world. We are in this world. We live in this culture. We can't help it. But we should not be of this culture. So we have a dual identity. I have a credit card in my pocket that when I go to the grocery store today, I'm going to use it to pay for my food. It's a worldly system. It's the Babylon system. I have to be involved in that system in order to get groceries. But I don't have to buy into the materialism of the world, which is part of the identity of our pagan culture. I don't have to bow down to the pagan gods that we have. What would be some of our pagan gods? Money. Self. And inclusiveness. Phones. Yes. We don't have to bow down to those things. Those are not our gods. Second thing I think in the so what is, you never ever have to sin. There is always a way out. Can you think of a verse that says that in the New Testament?
James 1, something.
1 Corinthians what? 10:13, which says?
No temptation has seized you except what is common to man. And God is faithful. He will provide a way of escape when you are tempted. He will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way of escape.
Exactly. There's always a way of escape. You are never trapped to where you have to sin. But unless you resolve in your heart to not defile yourself, you won't know where those escape paths are. God will provide them, but if you're not looking for them, you're not going to find them. Does that make sense? Daniel was looking for a way to not defile himself, and he came up with two ideas. The first one was shot down, then he came up with another one. We may have to do the same thing when confronted with situations where, man, it just looks like I have no options. Well, there may be options that the Holy Spirit might bring to your mind, but you're going to have to be looking for them. So act on your conviction. Act on your conviction. Daniel didn't just hope that maybe this food isn't going to be include pork tonight, but he acted on his conviction and went to his principal and then to his teacher. Get creative when faced with roadblocks. I could have put another bullet point there, and have friends that encourage you along the same direction. I wonder how much Daniel would have had the courage to do what they did if he hadn't had those three roommates who supported him and said, yeah, we're in. All four of them went after it. So you don't have to sin. Let me go back. Let me get to where. When I was a youth pastor in Minnesota, of all places, I was in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Anybody ever been to St. Cloud? You have? You know where it is. I was a youth pastor there, and I was coming home from something late at night, like at 11:30, in the middle of winter. Now, I'm a San Diegan. Winter was a new experience for me there, you know. And there was a little lake in the middle of town. Just in the highway went right past it, kind of above it. You can see the lake. It was all frozen during the middle of the winter. And there was a parking lot down by the lake, and that was where kids would go to make out in their cars. And as I'm driving along, I look down and I see Kevin Olson's car. He's one of my guys. He's a senior in high school, one of the student leaders, and he and Joy Olson were like, they were together. And his car is in that parking lot. And the windows are kind of steamed up. So I pulled off, pulled into the parking lot, turned off my headlights before I did. And just as I pulled into the parking lot, I see the driver's side door open. Out tumbles Kevin. He throws his keys in, closes the door, and starts running across the lake. It's a frozen lake. All right? He's not like walking on water. So I went, oh, that's weird. So I turned around, drove to the other side of the lake. Here comes Kevin. You want in? Yes. He's got booger sickles coming out of his nose. And I go, what's going on? And he quoted a verse from our student leader Bible study that Tuesday morning early at a restaurant nearby called Perkins. He says, I'm fleeing youthful lusts. I went, oh, good boy, good boy. We high-fived, and I took him home. Joy, got in, she drove herself home. He did what Daniel did. He found a way that he didn't have to sin. Even though it was 11:30 at night and it was like 10 degrees outside. And he took off running, which, yay, Kevin. He and Joy eventually got married. And so Joy Olson became Joy Olson. Or maybe Joy Olson. She didn't have to change her name. So you don't ever have to sin. There's always a way out.
Was she related to him?
No.
Alabama.
She was not related to him.
Just so happened to have the same last name.
All right, finally. Believe that when you are faithful, God will come through. Like the verse we had quoted for us, he will provide a way of escape, but he will also come through. He will work in you. Like he worked in those 4 young men. Maybe not that, God, please make me really good looking, but he will work in your character and make you a really, really much cooler person. He might even make you smarter. He might give you skills you otherwise would never have had. We just don't know. Every person is unique, and your relationship with him will have a different flavor than my relationship with him. He'll work in you, and he will work through you. At the end of this thing, Daniel and his 3 friends, the 4 guys, were given high level positions. And they had an influence on Babylon for the benefit of the Israelis for the next 70 years. God worked on Israel's behalf through these 4 guys. He will work in you. He will work through you. So, Daniel chapter 1 is in the books. Okay, we come back from the next session, Daniel chapter 2. Do you want to try to read it before you get here, or you want to read it when you get here? When you get here. Got it. All right, go take a break.